Warning. Some episodes of Where Did the Road Go will contain a warning. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following awesome individuals: Greg Ross, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Friske. Thank you so much for helping make this show possible.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have, Christopher Ernst.
Yes.
And the mighty Saxon.
Hello.
Who is today 107 years old.
Yeah.
Yes, is my 107th birthday today.
You look
I'm thankful I can still eat solid foods.
You look really, really good for 107.
Thank you.
It's all the young blood that you're getting transferred into your system, right?
Oh,
It is.
the adrenochrome, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it.
What's fun is I absorb it through my skin. So
Yeah, naturally sourced. Nobody has to, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, did you have a good 107th birthday?
I did. I got to just hear from a lot of friends today, and I've talked about martial arts a bit on the show, but that's taken me a lot of places in the world, and I end up with friends in a lot of different places doing cool stuff, and it's always fun when you hear from them because they're doing really cool things, and it's cool to know that they care about you enough to shoot you a note or something like that in the midst of all the other stuff they've got going on. So
Nice.
I felt pretty appreciated today, so I'm grateful.
Well, you're definitely appreciated here. You both are.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate being here.
Tonight, we're going to be interrogating Chris about his past.
You are, yep. It's about time. I'll had to come out at some point. No, I'm kidding. It's not going to be very exciting, people.
So someone had asked if Chris would go into some detail about his spiritual upbringing, because it's definitely unusual. And he's referenced it a lot, but as far as I know, we've never done a show on it. And I think you did a talk at Strange Realities on it, didn't you?
I have, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like when it comes to things that I research, it's probably the only area where I have, at least how I feel, that I have something to add to the esoteric conversation, because, other people are doing better research, and, if you want to look at fairies, go talk to, go read Josh Cutchin or listen to him or something like that, So, it's the only thing that I really kind of like research is the connections between this this mystic Meher Baba, who my parents followed when I was growing up, and they still do, and the occult, but more than that, like the connections between this guy and really like everything after Theosophy. So all of the stuff that, we usually talk about, and all the different sort of interconnected global currents that have been going on since the, mid 1800s. So I did a couple of presentations on that at Strange Realities, different aspects of it. And I reference it all the time on the show.
Right.
It's, probably frustrating for some people because it's this weird syncretic, sort of mashed together of Vedanta, and which is Hinduism, particular branch of Hinduism, Sufism, Christian mysticism, and Zoroastrianism. That really is very unique. So it might be contradictory even for some folks.
I have two questions to start.
Yeah.
One, do you still follow him?
Not in the way that my parents do. Okay. So it's the way that I was brought up was very specifically in, I guess, the sphere of they call themselves Baba lovers. And it's very particularly, I would say, even though I think there maybe are more people, the group that existed was very much like a 60s hippie group though I know a lot of people would say that they, were not or maybe aren't anymore. But to me, in my estimation, and, forgive me if there's anybody out there, I don't think they are, that are listening to the show that, came from this and doesn't identify that. But it's a lot of hippies who sort of discovered Meher Baba through the 1960s sort of frenzy for Eastern, mysticism and spirituality that came through like the Beatles and, all those guys in, England, all like the rock and roll sort of, the rock and roll guru connection that happened in the 60s. And, if you watch the Woodstock movie, you'll see there's a, big scene where there's a big poster of Meher Baba there. And so he became very popular as kind of like a love guru. And I say that, with quotes because he did, some of what he was sort of espousing in the philosophy came from bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of devotion and love, which is something that if you were, raised with Western yoga, or you don't know a lot about different sort of traditional yogic practices, it's a particular like discipline, which has to do with this idea of love and compassion. So in that way, they were right. But it's just really funny because, he popped up in the 60s, but there's this whole voluminous history of what he was doing prior to 1960s, particularly like pre-World War II. Yeah.
And my second question would be, was it a cult?
In the sense that a cult is something where you have a figure that people sort of I guess the foundation is built upon, a central figure, yes, but it's also a cult in the same way that, like, I don't know, early Christianity was a cult or early Buddhism was a cult. There is a person around which there is this, these people sort of gather, because if you look at his life, and there's a lot of writing on it, it's only one of the reasons why I feel like I can speak on it with some certainty is because basically from like 1920s or even earlier than that, essentially all this guy's life, there have been people since his childhood or teens that have found him remarkable. So they started writing about their experiences and documenting them. And there's like books and books and books written by, Indian people, Muslim people, people from the West, people from England, people from America, all these different, Australia, all these different countries who traveled with him. But that being said, there was never anything in terms of the other guru cults that you hear about, like, Osho, the Wild Wild Country stuff, or any of those others, like, no people were expected to do anything. There's no cutting off from your family. It's basically like, I don't know, what's a good way to think about an analogy? I don't know if there really is one, because it's very specific to, I think, Indian culture and a very, like, a non-Western, like non-American culture to have these like saints or holy figures that people begin to follow. But I guess the best way to describe it is, you can imagine some sort of itinerant mystic who a lot of people want to follow around. And so he says, okay, you can follow me around, but, you have to go to these weird places with me and wait while I meditate in a cave for 2 days. You can follow me around and do that, but nobody was ever asked to do anything. And like, give up anything, particularly in the way that you think of all the cults. There was never any like controversy around people being abused that I have found, and I've looked for it because I would really like to find something that would, give me the certainty as to like, oh, it was another one of those crazy cults. But no, there isn't. Like, in fact, the people that I met throughout my life that lived with Meher Baba, would really talked about him in the same way that, you read about people talking about Christ or Buddha, in the Bible. Like, they loved this guy. They really felt like there was something special about him. And if you look through all of the books, that's what everybody said. There was this magnetic sort of, quality of love and compassion about him that sort of drew people to him. And this is among like there are tons of people who had weird mystical experiences that ended up bringing them into contact with Meher Baba too. So, I mean, it's a hard thing to say. I think there are a lot of people in the West that probably would look at it as a cult because it's around a central figure. And I think that's something that in the West in particular, people are uncomfortable with good reason, because there's a lot of abuse that comes there.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you were to ask somebody in India, it's just like every other person you know, like in the same way that somebody goes to church, people have gurus, you know, and it's just, that's how things work. And some of them are abusive and there's weird stuff in there. And then, you know, some aren't. And I guess it's up to the person themselves to decide. So as a person who was raised there, the only things that felt cultish to me are the fact that my parents, for their own, you know, out of their own reasoning, you know, very much acted as outsiders. And that was something they brought upon themselves, you know. It's also something that, you know, I was ostracized and kids made fun of me because my parents weren't Christian. And that's something I think anybody that, you know, if you're a Muslim or Hindu, you would experience that as well. But I was never asked to do anything. All that I had as a kid growing up was basically, there was a lot of stuff that was read to me and a lot of material that was presented to me that I could, or, you know, I was given the choice of being interested in reading it or not. I was a kid who read a lot. So I read a lot of this. And then, you know, I was brought to meet a lot of these people who were with Meher Baba when he was alive. My godfather, you know, quote unquote, my godfather when I was born is, you know, he grew up with Meher Baba. He's a guy from the West. He's actually a Christian minister. But, you know, there's nothing I was asked to do. I just met a lot of people and talked to a lot of people. And so there's a lot of information given to me that, you know, the only thing I guess you could say that was weird or, you know, I don't know, inappropriate about it is that I was, as a child, I was very much told in the same way that, you know, a child who's raised Christian is told that this is the correct spirituality and this is the most accurate and, you know, this is the truth. That's what my parents told me. So, you know, make of that what you will.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Chris, on the yoga side of it, you were talking about that he kind of had this tradition of love and kindness kind of thing. Would the actual yogic practice of that look something like what we consider yoga to be with the positions and poses, or would it be more like
it would have
sitting meditations?
Would have more to do with meditation, but he didn't espouse meditation as something which is particularly important. I mean, really, when you get down to it, like the biggest general thing that, you know, was, I guess, Meher Baba's teaching would be to, you know, it's kind of some of the same stuff you find with like Seth and a lot of, you know, new age stuff, which is bad or good depending on you think about it, which is like selflessness, you know, trying to diminish your ego, trying to be kind, you know, being kind to people, not reacting in anger, not being lustful. And by lustful means like, you know, trying not to overindulge in, you know, food, drink, sex, whatever. It's this idea of, you know, being, you know, so in many senses, there was like, you know, moving towards the austerity that I think comes with some spiritual practices. But Bhakti Yoga, the way that like Meher Baba sort of espoused it, was really very much just, it was about love and trying to, you know, work through love and the idea of unmitigated love. This idea that love is something that we maybe, you know, don't really even understand, like the love between even a child and a parent is not as powerful as the, you know, the universal love that I guess exists in the collective unconscious, which, you know, is the, you know, in the way that Meher Baba would sort of describe it, is the infinite mind of God that we all share. I guess I'm stepping too, you know, maybe quickly into some dense stuff that in terms of his cosmology, but yeah, I hope that answered your question.
It did. Actually, Sarai, do you want to ask Chris about the foundations of the cosmology?
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to ask about the foundations of the guy. Who was he?
Oh,
yeah. Okay. About the what?
Who he was.
Sure. All right.
Like where he came from.
I'm going to try to do this without getting too lost in, like, because I have so much information on this. Like I was telling Sarai before we started, you know, I've been like building up my sort of research on this for years and years and years. So I have, those presentations I did at Strange Realities, which, are turned into, little short writings. And I've been, putting together these sort of like film, like animatics of, working at a documentary for talking about some of this stuff. So I got a ton of this information like circling around in my head, and I hope I'm being clear with it. All right. So that being said, who this guy was, Meher Baba was born in 1895. He was born in India to a Zoroastrian family, particularly a Zoroastrian family from the Yezd region. So the Zedis, in that area that we heard about through stuff going on in the Middle East, that same place. And his father was this guy named Shahryar Irani, and he was kind of like a wandering mystic for a long time. He, wandered around the deserts of Iran and, tried to do these different, like, they call them austerity rituals, but they're really like magic rituals where you sit in a circle for 40 days and 40 nights without eating, and you can't move from the circle. And, he apparently tried to do that. And then he had this insane mystical experience where he saw an angel. And this is all stuff that's, similar in a lot of ways to different Sufi practices, which is the mystical arm of Islam. So Meher Baba was born in 1895 in India. By that point, his father and mother, they were fairly well off. They were merchants. So they like had toddy shops, which are like coffee houses, or, little bars, because they have a little bit of cannabis in the toddy. So it's a kind of you get some drunkish people. And growing up, Meher Baba was sort of this magnetic little kid that a lot of people were attracted to. When he was 18, he had this very distinct mystical experience where he was working, I think, I forget what he was. He might have been working at the toddy shop that his father was at. Or no, I think he was actually in college at that point. He went to Deccan College. But there was this saint whose name was Hazrat Babajan. And she was this woman, this Sufi saint that has her own interesting story. There are accounts of her being killed by Hindu soldiers and then rising from the dead. And these Hindu soldiers becoming her sort of protectors. So they like protected her at her little shrine. And there are all these people, these saints, or a lot of them in India and Iran and the Middle East, that they basically like pick a place to sit and they don't move from there. And they're there for years and years and years. And people build up these shrines around them. Well, that was the deal with Hazrat Babajan. And so what happened is she kissed Meher Baba on his forehead. And what happened is he basically, he explains happened is that his consciousness merged with the infinite. And so he basically became unaware of his body, and he became, as he describes, God conscious. So conscious of the infinite, consciousness of the universe that is God, became one with that. And so his mother, for years, couple of years, he was in this sort of fugue state where he didn't eat, but he was still like living somehow. And he would spend the days, a lot of the days, because apparently there's this, he said, intense psychic pressure in his head. He would bang his forehead against the floor of his room, and he still had the scar on it from all his banging. He was trying to alleviate the pain. But for these couple of years that he was in this fugue state, he started doing things like he would walk miles and miles to visit these different saints that were in the area where he was. One of them being the Saint Sai Baba of Shirdi, not Sai Baba with the afro, but this older guy, a Muslim saint named Sai Baba of Shirdi. Look him up; he's on Wikipedia. And then there are these other saints too. I won't go into their names, but basically, what he said happened is that there are these 5 perfect masters that are always. There's always a different person who's fulfilling this role of one of the 5 perfect masters here on Earth. They're kind of like the Mahatmas or the Ascended Masters, and they guided him and acted as his teachers, particularly this one guy named Upansi Maharaj, who is another saint, Hindu saint. You can look him up. He was this weird guy who, I say weird in the sense that he was, doing strange mystical stuff, but he like lived in a cage for several years, willingly.
Oh,
he
weird.
like, put himself in a cage. All sorts of stuff like that. Sai Baba, there are these stories of him removing his arms and legs and removing his intestines to clean them. People who saw him doing this would lose their sight for, months because they would see like this blinding angelic light. Really strange stories, or interesting stories. So anyway, basically Meher Baba went through this period in his early 20s where he was being trained by these different perfect masters, as he calls them, these different saints that were around India. And he started gathering this, these people that started thinking of him as a guru, which is how it happens in the culture there. And so they started asking to follow him around. And he sort of gets this gang of people that are like all into what he wants to do, which most of his life was spent setting up schools, free clinics, and feeding and helping poor and lepers. So that was mostly what he did throughout his life, and these people would follow him around and kind of help him with that. But when he was in his late 20s, I think, early 30s, around 30, when he was in 1925, he took a vow of silence. So between 1925 and his death in 1969, he didn't speak at all. And he communicated first through an alphabet board, which looks a lot like your text messaging. So he would be pointing at an alphabet board and people would, spell out what he would do. And then he started signing, doing sign language, but not any sign language. He invented his own sign language. And he had these special interpreters that basically he said, they talked about being able to read his sign language, but if you watch film of them communicating, and there's actually this great film shot by Jan de Bont, the guy who was the director of Speed, and he was a cinematographer in the 70s, and this Serbian filmmaker made this film called Beyond Words, Last Train to Zagreb, where he went to talk to Meher Baba in the late 60s before he died. And you can see this perfect, like amazing cinematography of Meher Baba, talking to this Serbian filmmaker about, drugs and LSD and, psychic stuff and spiritual advancement. And he's signing in this furious pace, sort of incomprehensible signs. And there's this Indian guy who's, his name was Erich, who I met a couple times in India, who was translating for him. And Erich said that, it got to the point where he was basically like, he heard this it was like a psychic connection, and he was speaking for Meher Baba. So I don't know if that, you can only take Erich's word for that. Right. But in that time, so I skipped far ahead. There's all this other stuff that he did. I won't go too far along with it, but, he set up these schools for children, and these children started having all of these insane spiritual experiences there. He sent some people, out to look for some students for, one of these schools, and they ended up in England hooking up with this guy from Crowley's scene, this guy named Meredith Starr. And he introduced them to England. So Meher Baba started going to England. They met these two people, William and Mary Beckett, which are connected to the guy that was the person who did the first ceremony for the 9 with Buharik, this guy Vinod. Dr. Vinod, he actually met with Baba the year before that first roundtable seance where the 9 were contacted through Vinod. There's a book where there's like this account of Vinod meeting Meher Baba and them talking about sort of spiritual stuff. He traveled through Hollywood and he met all these people that ended up being sort of important early Hollywood people in the 30s. Like the guy who wrote Dracula was a really, really big devotee of Meher Baba's, the guy who wrote Dracula and Frankenstein. He met, what's her name? There are all these sort of pictures of him with like Hollywood celebrities. He went to like Clark Gable's house. They did this like party for him. So he was kind of like moving around the 1930s sort of occult, esoteric, bourgeoisie circles. And, he had Princess Narina Machiavelli became sort of infatuated with him, and she was taking him around all these different places. But what he said he was doing when he was going around all these different places or all around the world in the 30s is he called it laying cable. And there was this randomness to his travels where he'd basically just go and meet people. That's all he would do. He would meet people. He would have a private conversation with them, and that was it. Or he would go to like in the middle of crowds. He would go and he would just sort of stand there for a couple of, minutes, and then he would leave. Really, like he never did anything concrete. He would, he started writing scripts with people in Hollywood, but he would just let these projects go. So really, interesting to look at all of that. He did a lot of seclusion work, which meant he would go into like caves. And at one point he built himself this like coffin-like structure that he went inside every day for several years. And he wrote this secret book out by hand that was lost at some point in the 50s. The only person who ever read it or parts of it was Gandhi.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. At one point, he hooked up with the Sufi group that was started by Inayat Khan, and they ended up following him. This woman whose name was Ivy Ducci. She became the new Murshida after Rabia Martin took over for Inayat Khan. And he essentially helped them write a new Sufi doctrine. Unfortunately, that sect, the Sufism Reoriented, has now become sort of a New Age California cult in Walnut Creek. But for a while there, he was sort of working with them. And it's interesting to note, too, that Ivy Ducci's husband, I forget his name. He was the head of Aramco at that time in the 40s and 50s. And he was the one who was kind of like critical in convincing Dulles to keep Arab oil interests in the American pocket, which is a very strange thing. Because if you think if that didn't happen, we'd be in a very different place right now. He also spent a ton of time going around India and meeting all of these saints and kind of like itinerant spiritual people that are called, according to Meher Baba, musts. Which is spelled M-A-S-T, and they are, basically like the way he described them is that they're lost in different planes of existence because of their spiritual advancement, but they're sort of stuck. And so he was helping them ostensibly by going and meeting with them. And, there's this voluminous, like 4-volume account of a British doctor named William Donkin, who followed Meher Baba around all during the 40s during the war, where he was meeting with all of these musts. He walked thousands of miles around India and Pakistan and Afghanistan and stuff like that, meeting these guys. And he would do things like he would go into caves with them for 2 hours. There'd be no noise, but when they emerged, like somebody touches the must on his shoulder, just glances them and they get like a serious electric shock or something like that. Or there's this one story of a must coming out from seclusion and work with Meher Baba, and he went out and he like grabbed onto these power cables on an electric, like a telephone line, but electric, above ground electric cables, and was like started like chomping on them. And it would have killed anybody else, but it didn't kill this guy. So there are all these, there's numerous stories of these strange mystical psychic experiences that happened to all the people that are hanging out with Meher Baba. And there's tons of books about it, especially in the 30s, like 20s and 30s. There are all of these like, occult revival folks that were hanging out with him and traveling around the world and stuff like that. So I probably left out a bunch of stuff, and I probably included so much that it's confusing, but that's kind of, that's one overview.
So I want to just throw out an observation here, and I don't want to offend any listeners with my limited knowledge on this, but Soraya and Barbara, and I forget who else did the show on the telepathy tapes.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about when he was younger, like banging his head and then using the alphabet board and then his own sign language, reminded me so much of the experiences of some of the people documented in the telepathy.
Oh, no, completely.
Yeah. And even more so with the going around to the musts and like sort of like helping them break through a little bit.
So anyway, I met one of the musts. I met one of them when I was in India one time. This guy, Muhammad Must, and he was one of the oldest. Like he was over 100 when I met him. And
just like Saxon.
Just like me, yeah. What was his name again?
Muhammad, yeah.
Oh, I've known a few of those.
Yeah, I known a few of those. Yeah.
Nice people.
It's crazy. I don't know. I can go. There's a ton of stuff I could go on. I mean,
tell us about when you met the guy.
Yeah.
I never met Meher Baba.
No, the
Bus.
Okay. Yeah. No, he died in 1969. No. I met, there's several people that I met, when I went to India, and I mean, there was nothing, they were people just like you and me. To me, they felt very genuine. Muhammad Must was an interesting, person to meet because unlike the other people who were called, they refer to them, the, people who are either the Western, the American and English Baba lovers, or, there are also tons of Indian folks who are Baba lovers. They don't call themselves that, I don't think necessarily, but they follow Meher Baba as a guru, which is a very common thing over in India. So probably a ton more Indian than, non-Indian Meher Baba followers. But this guy Muhammad was, he was still a must, which means that he didn't speak very much. And his particular thing was, he displayed what I guess a lot of people would probably consider autistic, behavior, is that he spends most of his time squatting in the dirt and looking in the dirt for what he calls dish, which is a word that kind of means I'm looking for something that I'm looking for. And so he spends all this time looking for it. And the only time, apparently, because he didn't do this when I was around, that he really would ever talk to people is when Meher Baba was around. And, he would talk about Meher Baba and, sort of communicate when he was there acting as an intermediary. But Muhammad didn't say anything to me. I think, he smiled at me, and I kind of when people meet him, I'm sure there's this place in India where, the Westerners, the people who are not Indian stay, which is, got toilets and stuff like that. And so he's probably used to a bunch of white folks coming through and saying hi to him. And, he's passed at this point now, but, this was in the 90s, I think, that I met him. Yeah. But I did meet some other folks that, like Erich, who was Meher Baba's interpreter. And one of his closest disciples, they call them the Mandali, which means circle. But the way that Meher Baba talked about him is he talked about him very much like, the apostles. And listen, I'll be frank, because this is something that some, people may want to bring up. Meher Baba did declare himself to be the avatar. His cosmology says that the avatar is a soul no different, than any of ours, but was simply the first soul to attain God realization, which is the goal of existence, which is essentially to go through and exist as a soul, as every single thing in the universe. So you start as quanta, and then you end up as, some sort of humanoid, or I don't know, maybe there are other forms that achieve this consciousness where, that we have, where you can start to move into what is called involution, where instead of evolving, which you have been doing, both physically and spiritually for the past, 14 billion years, you end up going into the other planes. So you have lifetimes where you are, living in the astral world, and when you're living in the subtle world and the mental world, because he divides it up into these 7 planes of existence that are interpenetrated with ours. We're in them right now, but we just are not using, the organs or the body that is associated with that state of consciousness. And so his whole thing was that, this avatar, which was, Muhammad was the same avatar. Meher Baba says he was Muhammad, he was Jesus Christ, he was Buddha, He was Zoroaster. He was Rama. He was Krishna. And this is usually where most people turn away. But, it really, to me, it doesn't impact much because the way that I look at it, like, when he talked about those things, he wasn't saying it in the sense of like, I am all those things, to take it away. His whole, goal, and he stated this many times, though not in words, was he said, I've come not to teach, but to awaken. And that everything that he was doing when he was here was not to, become some sort of teacher or espouse particular like universal knowledge, but was to work with individual people in their inner lives. So, he was pretty clear about, don't listen to what I say. I have, very little global sort of, advice to give besides, this idea of love. And I guess, at this point for me, it's not something that bothers me because there's not I guess the way I think of it, and this is just my consideration, is that from looking all over the material, I'm pretty much convinced that either he was I think he was absolutely completely telling the truth, and this is what he believed. I think it's certainly possible, because I think other people have found this, that, one person might be able to reach that state of, perfect sort of harmony with the universe. So they do merge into, I guess, what the God state is. And I think that I from everything that I've looked at in terms of his material and the other material from other people too, it seems like we are all doing the same thing. And so because he was so explicit in saying like, I'm no different from you, I guess I'm just like further, like I got here first, but I'm coming back to help you. I don't know. It doesn't bother me, but some people it does, and I completely understand that.
Yeah, I can see that. The fact that he's saying, well, I'm the first one to have done this, when we have plenty of other teachers who seem to be teaching similar things.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that, again, I feel like part of the reaction that people have to that, one is that it's very different from what people are raised on in India. And you have to remember, this was he was alive from 1895 to 1969, very different time. Yeah. And if you were working as a person in India there, he's basically doing what everybody else was doing at the time in India. So I don't know. It's not an excuse, and certainly people can call me an apologist, but to me at this point, it's not. I guess because I've met so many people that lived with him, and I've read so many accounts of people who were living with him at the time. Unless everybody's lying, it didn't, him believing this and declaring it didn't seem to change the way that he acted to anybody. And it didn't seem to change the fact that like he never did anything that was narcissistic in terms of his behavior. It was simply this thing that he would say. And he oftentimes talked about it as in the sense of like, this is just something that I experience, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you this is not what I'm experiencing. So I think that the fact that, like you said, Soraya, other people are experiencing that, I don't know. Maybe a bunch of people were experiencing that, and some, were able to filter it in a positive way, and some weren't. I don't know, Yeah.
Interesting. There was so much information there.
I know, there's a ton of information there.
So where does this connect into Theosophy?
So it connects into Theosophy in the sense that, like, what Meher Baba is espousing as the cosmology for the earth and for the world that we live in, there are some similarities to what you basically Blavatsky cribbed from Vedanta and Sufism. And the fact that he talks very specifically about, these five, so the way that it works is that there are 5 perfect masters. Like I said, if I'm talking about the cosmology of Meher Baba, there are 5 perfect masters that can be male or female that are here on Earth at all times, and they basically they are the ones that run the spiritual hierarchy of the universe. So all archangels and angels, and fairies and houris, and all of these different things called agents that are, if you look into sort of Sufi mysticism, there's this hierarchy of people called abdals and avtads. Some of these are like shape changers, in fact, that can bilocate from one place to another. This is all the spiritual hierarchy, and the spiritual hierarchy is, what is controlled by these perfect masters. So, there's this really strong, trend that sounds very much like a lot of the ascended master stuff in Theosophy. And I think that, if maybe Blavatsky, and I don't know, maybe this is the same thing that Gurdjieff, came across when they came across Sufis, at some point in their travels, like Gurdjieff said, and, I don't know who Blavatsky really met with, but they heard of this, they heard of a tradition that was similar to Meher Baba's, if not maybe the same one, because they're actually, if you look at all the perfect masters that sort of trained him, they all have like lineages that go back. You can read historical accounts of this master who taught this person. And it's very much based in, I forget the name for it, but there's a Hindu tradition that goes way back to the Vedas, which is the master-student tradition. And you're going to find it also in, Asian spirituality and even the martial arts. It's this idea of, the sensei and the student. And there are all these, there are these very specific numbers for different people that are on these different spiritual planes in the spiritual hierarchy. So you have like, 56,000 people that are, on the first plane and 666 that are on the second plane. And I don't know, I mean, all of this, who knows, maybe nonsense, but it's very specific. And that's one thing that I think is interesting about it, is that you have like specific and very very concrete taxonomy for the spiritual hierarchy of like how many different saints at this level and that level. It's very similar to like the stuff you see in ceremonial grimoire magic, it's interesting.
I had another question, but now I've lost it. Why did your parents start following him? Like, what brought them into it?
I mean, they had what could be called spiritual experiences, both of them. My mother, she basically saw a photo of Baba somewhere when I think she was in college, or was, right about that time. And she had, and a lot of people had stories about this, this like overwhelming feeling of love and attraction to Meher Baba. And so, yeah, she had no idea who he was. She saw a picture of him and, was basically obsessed until she found out. And same thing with my father. And then they met because of that. They met essentially because, I think it was like my father was in California. My mother was in Atlanta. And I think it was, she like had put up on like a posting board, like a local hippie co-op, like looking for somebody, looking for Baba lover to drive cross country with. That's how they met.
So he's the reason you exist.
What's that?
He's the reason you exist.
I mean, he is. And I don't talk about this a lot just because it was so long ago, but I have a vivid memory of when I was 3 or 4 years old of seeing one of the pictures of Meher Baba my parents have told me that this happened too, that I saw a picture of Meher Baba in the house, we were living at the time, and I started crying hysterically saying, I want to go back. I want to go back. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go back with him. So I don't know. I mean, maybe I was, maybe I reincarnated and I knew him in the past life. I have no idea. But so my takeaway from this for anybody that's, interested is that I do think you have to look at this in, I don't know, there's some important things that you have to think about when you are looking at this. And one is this idea of the trickster and the paranormal. Okay. So Meher Baba talked a lot about this idea of play and game, and this idea that has a name in Vedanta, which is Leela, Leela, and it means divine sport. And he talked a lot about how what he was doing as the avatar, and what anybody who is, sort of working in the spiritual realm is doing, is that they are playing a game, and that there's quite a bit of he referred to himself as a mischievous. He actually referred to himself as a mischievous chicken a lot, which is a strange
I like that
analogy, which is funny because the word for mischievous in I think is it Urdu or Hindi, I don't know, is shaitan. So he called himself shaitan, shaitan Burgi al Murgi al Baka, which means the mischievous chicken who walked out from the nest. His personality was incredibly tricksterish. Like he was, this very sly individual with like always a mischievous smile who was, he would tease people playfully. Like he was never mean. He was always kind, but he would like play tricks. He was the kind of guy that would, pull a coin behind a kid's ear. Or he would, I heard this from my godfather, but, I don't know if this is true or not. He said he was, when Meher Baba was very old, he became very, very seriously injured. He had 2 really bad car accidents. One, in fact, in smack middle of the United States near Prague, Oklahoma. And he was really crippled for like the last 10, 15 years of his life. And there's this one time that he was flying on a plane and, my godfather, Charles, he was helping him, like, I guess, get up and walk down. And I guess Charles said he was thinking to himself, isn't this crazy? I'm helping this holy man. He was feeling like prideful in himself of like, I'm helping this holy man, get off, I'm helping him and he's crippled. And all of a sudden, Baba started to lift him up off the ground. And then he looked over at him and winked and he put him back down, like this feat of superhuman strength all of a sudden. Very strange. And you'd have to trust my godfather that that's the truth, but he said it happened. So I think that's one thing that's interesting to think about is this idea of tricksters. So if there are contradictions or if there are, things that go one way, but, seem to go the other, or even, the whole avatar thing, which is this incredibly, like really combustible statement to make. It's, I guess and maybe this is apologetics again, I put him under that. But some other things to think about are, besides the trickster thing, I think it's important to think about like how a lot of the stuff that Meher Baba was communicating through all these voluminous records, documenting what he was communicating and people he was talking to, is that a lot of that became what is, New Age. And I know there are a lot of other people that were doing it at the same time, so you maybe want to take them into account too. But I think there are these people that were really instrumental, even if they are not directly connected with it at this point, in putting together some of these terms and phrases and things like that have become so prevalent in even the really bad negative side of New Age. I think it's important to think about the fact that maybe there is a group of yogis that either believe they control the universe and exert psychic influence on the masses, or maybe there is. I have no idea. It's one of those things like, you're not going to prove or disprove the existence of Mahatmas or, masters. I also think it's important to think about the horror of Meher Baba's cosmology in the sense that we're basically humans are flesh cocoons that are made to like create consciousness for the universe. I think that's a kind of, I don't know if you were Lovecraft and thinking of it, it's this like human form as livestock to create the entity of the universal consciousness. I don't know. There's something that's kind of like creepy about that to me. So, I think that for anybody that is interested in, especially like early like 30s occult revival, esotericism, there's a lot in the Meher Baba material, stuff about magic, sorcery, the occult, stuff about ghosts, stuff about, fairies, stuff about very little, but a little tiny bit about UFOs. Tons that are like, intersecting with weird conspiracies. And then if you start to go out to the people who were part of his, his mandali, his circle, people like, there's this woman, Phyllis Frederick, who you can find some talks of hers on YouTube and stuff like that. She was like crazy psychic and had all these dreams about Atlantis and apocalyptic visions and, things like that.
Okay. What did he say about reincarnation?
Well, yeah, sorry. I mean, that's, Yeah, that's a huge part of it. So reincarnation, it kind of goes back to that whole idea that, each soul. So, okay, the everything, all of creation is, think of it like one big ocean, okay,
Right.
of infinite ocean. And that ocean contains both everything and nothing. And at one point, this is very much drawn from Vedanta, there was what is called lahar, which is the rustling or the stirring of a question. And the question that this, universe of, I wouldn't say universe, that all of creation asks itself in the timeless time before time exists and after it is, who am I? And we, all of creation, is the result of that question. Who am I? When that question was asked, creation happened. And I don't know, Big Bang or whatever you want to call it. He doesn't go very much into it. But what happens is then, then comes all of creation. And this also merges a lot with the Hindu notion of pralaya, the breath of Brahma. The breath of Brahma, if you look at the yuga cycles and all that, it's this particular amount of time, billions of years, and the beginning of that. So you have this unlimited, seamless ocean. And now imagine that each of the drops in that ocean all of a sudden has this shell around it. And that shell is what we've been building sort of as our physical bodies through reincarnation. So you have this drop that goes through millions and billions of lives, starting out as, gaseous form, and then stones, and then vegetables, and then, insects, and then fish, and then birds, and then, mammals, and then humans, and I don't know, maybe something else after that, but he only talked about to humans. And that what's happening is that the soul is going through all of these experiences, experiencing as much as it can, and that it is gaining what he calls sanskaras, which are impressions. And those impressions are helping build this consciousness that ends up reaching a certain sort of, breaking point here with us on Earth as humans. And that once we reach this human form, what we will start to do is we will start to involve, which is when we, will gain psychic powers and start to see globes of light in the sky and hear strange sounds and, smell strange smells. And then at some point we become unconscious of our body. And this is over the successive lifetime. So basically what you're doing is you're building this very rich, multifaceted sort of, experience around your drop soul, even though you've never left the ocean. You basically just have this shell around you that allows you to individuate, but you're still connected to everything. And so once you do your whole involution series, ostensibly you achieve God consciousness, and you live as some sort of amalgam of all of your previous lives together, but also merged with unified consciousness of the universe. So reincarnation is in fact like it's a tool that helps consciousness evolve, and that's where you get karma from. Really, karma just being the law of cause and effect. So you have to have this balance. If you do one thing in a particular way, you have to kind of balance it. So you have this balance between, I don't know, people would say good and evil, virtue and vice. Some lifetimes you've lived as a horrible person. Sometimes you've lived as a great person in horrible circumstances. Sometimes you've lived as a person in great circumstances that is very kind, and that all of these things exist, within your sort of oversoul. And that one of the reasons why people don't usually remember their lives from life to life is that it would be too difficult to do the work you need to do in your life now if you remembered everything about previous lives that contradicted it. However, in between your physical life, which, is, according to Meher Baba, only the surface sort of level of things, you are living, you are existing consciously in your subtle body, where you do have this knowledge of your other lives. So it's very similar to other things that through like Seth or other channeled material of, you have this knowledge in the afterlife state that allows you, or, whatever mechanisms or systems you're working with to go into your next life with, a plan. Like you're going there to do things that are building upon the experiences that you had in the last one. But you're only able to remember all your lives and see the big picture in between those lives.
I like that idea, though, of not losing your lives between things once you get to that point. Because that's always that thing that I always find interesting when people talk about reincarnation is that, once you've done all that and you get to the other side, you don't really care about what you did in some ways or who you were.
I mean, the way that
other than like the functional parts, right?
Yeah. I mean, the way it's described, it seems to me, is that there's also this level of we just can't even comprehend what it's like to exist in that state. So, trying to compare our limited consciousness now to that is just, you can't. So, I mean, I like that too. And I think that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting part of the cosmology. But I also think, just from, all of my research into it, that there's also this sort of underlying principle of even going beyond into the, in between our reincarnations, when we're not existing in the physical body, that even that state of consciousness is something we can't really wrap our minds around because it's so different or expanded or, from such a different perspective.
Hey, Chris, if this isn't taking us too off topic, what part of his cosmology resonates with you the most?
Oh, man. I mean, I think a lot of it does. I think that there's... it's hard to describe simply because a lot of the way that I'd say my spiritual, life and path has worked has been based upon very personal things that have happened to me, personal connections or synchronicities or experiences that I've had that, I wouldn't even be able to describe, it sort of exists beyond a description. In that, way that intuitive, synchronistic things sometimes do. And I think that probably has more to do with, my relationship to Meher Baba as a spiritual figure than it does any sort of intellectual, appeal. Though, but at the same time, intellectually, and I guess there's no way to really express this or communicate it to another person without having them be inside my head. But intellectually, I have never gotten to a point where in reading the Meher Baba material where I've been completely I think that there's, that just makes no sense. There's usually some sort of connection, especially as I've gone on to look sort of at the, the wide berth of esoteric material that exists out there that you can find on the internet now. And I'm able to look at the history of esoteric philosophy going back, hundreds of years. It all seems to, line up with things that other people have said. And even if it's slightly different, I feel like there's the same kind of mouthfeel to it. And that if you're talking about something that's so spiritually or mystically obtuse, that I guess I have some forgiveness there in things being kind of the same shape, but, a little different. And so I feel like there's a lot of similarities and a lot of things that have, I guess, not disproven, but in fact reinforced, some truth to what Meher Baba said. And again, what he said, besides the one book that he put out, that he, was very much written by him, and not the one that's missing. There's one that he dictated that came out in the 60s that actually it was the guy who wrote Fairy Faith in Celtic Country. He did the foreword
Evan
for
Wentz.
it. Yeah, Evan Wentz. Evan Wentz was a Meher Baba proponent,
Okay.
So there's besides that, most of the stuff that he quote unquote said was stuff he was talking to a particular group or an individual person. And I think you have to look at that stuff from that perspective, in that he was talking to a particular group of people, saying what needed to be said to them, as opposed to a different person. And he said that a lot. He said that if you look at the different avatars, again, you have to buy into that there's some veracity to what he's saying, but that, each of these avatars, and in fact, if you look at it, there are, all of these different incarnations of different saints and avatars, like Saint Francis and stuff like that he talked about, who were, important and, nearly at the God realization place too. I think if you look at a lot of them, they're saying similar things, and they're, I don't know, reinforcing this sort of perennial philosophy, to quote from, I think it was Aldous Huxley who wrote the book Perennial Philosophy, that has a lot to do with that. I mean, I consider what Meher Baba was talking about to be very similar to that kind of, if anybody's read the Perennial Philosophy. It's basically this idea of, there's this reoccurring sort of core of religion, spirituality, natural law that you see kind of coming up again and again if you strip down different religions and spiritualities to their base essence.
Okay.
And I think I think Meher Baba's got that. And, I don't think you have to believe in him as my mom does, as like the second coming of Christ, in order to get anything from that. I think you can just read it and, or watch a bunch of YouTube videos on it. There's just some interesting stuff there. And if you want to dive deeply into the esoteric stuff, there's a lot of connections there to other things that, people have written, and, other stuff we discuss on Where Did the Road Go all the time.
Yeah. So something you said made me think of this, but my, art mentor growing up, that was, I always called like a cosmic mystic or something like that. Talked a lot about like, different avatars like you're talking about. And I'm wondering if he kind of picked that up from Meher Baba just casually or something, but
I don't know. The thing is that like that word, I heard the word avatar growing up, through the late 70s up until now, but I never, like, it was probably the first time that I started hearing it was, when people started using it as a part of gaming.
Oh yeah.
And I was wow, that's crazy. Like I never thought I'd heard this term in the popular, consciousness. This is kind of wild.
Well, yeah, like that,
and it's
I heard it from a mentor.
That's the same. And he, as far as I can tell, I mean, he was the first person to really use that particular word. I mean, there are a lot of other people that were claiming to be, the second coming of Christ. So you've got like, Krishnamurti, or he actually said he wasn't. But, for a while, people were saying that, plenty of other people at the time there were several other, I guess, at least. But he, Meher Baba seemed to be the only person who was using that term avatar.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see it become so much a part of our zeitgeist at this point now.
Was Krishnamurti the one that Vaini follows?
I don't know. For some reason, I thought that Vaini didn't follow any gurus because he was vehemently against that.
Well, there was one particular guru that showed him how to wake up his Kundalini.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I think it was Krishnamurti. But
was it somebody that he met physically?
No, I think he just either read a book by him or watched something by him.
Might have been Ram Dass.
It wasn't Ram Dass.
Oh, okay.
But anyway,
Ram Dass met Meher Baba. They have an interesting, yeah.
We're gonna take a break.
Before we get too far from it, I was just going to throw this out there.
Well, let's take a break, and then you can throw it out there when we come back.
That's fine.
Okay.
Quick mid-show break here and a recommendation. First of all, everything Where Did the Road Go related can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And if you want to become a patron, it helps the show an immense amount. And it's only $3 a month. You get extra stuff with pretty much every show. You get the shows weeks early, commercial-free, and bonus stuff as well on top of all of that. Again, for only $3 a month. And there's a good little community in our Patreon at this point. All right, as for a recommendation, I'm going to go with something I think I mentioned either in this show or in the Patreon for it. The Dead Letter Office of Somewhere, Ohio. Since we recorded this, I've been able to listen to a lot more of this. It's almost anthology-like because they're reading different letters that are weird and spooky and paranormal. But there's also stuff with the characters who are reading the letters going on. And it's pretty good. I had started listening to the Department of Variance of Somewhere, Ohio, which follows this, and decided to go back and listen to this. And I think I mentioned that in the Patreon of this show, but that's my recommendation. Most of them came out in 2021. I think all of them came out in 2021. Oh, no, it ends in March of 2022. So I suspect it has an end. I'm not sure yet. There's 3 seasons. It's very well done and has some pretty interesting stories in it, so I'm enjoying it. That's my recommendation. Podcast, The Dead Letter Office of Somewhere, Ohio. And now back to the show. All right, we're back. Go ahead, Saxon.
Sorry about that. Yeah. For everybody listening, I tried to ask the question before Soraya got us back on the show. So that was smart of me.
It's your birthday. You can be forgiven.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. When you're 107, things slip your mind sometimes.
Oh, I thought it was 130.
Nice. You're older than the oldest marathon runner that just passed.
I saw that. That was really sad. But you're talking about some of these ideas being similar and things like that. Like, and this of course requires some belief, but my art mentor was always kind of the mind that like these are ideas that we're trying to come through all the time, and we especially needed to come through at a certain point. And so they sort of overtook people that were receptive to them, or open to it. And so that was kind of how you end up with this avatar idea too. But anyway, I just kind of was like noted that earlier.
I think that's a really good thing to think about. And Meher Baba was very explicit about the fact that, it's the perfect masters that bring the avatar down. It's not something the avatar does. It's like it's a very specific cosmology of these 5 perfect masters that apparently, they're here on Earth right now, and that they're, directing the universe, and that apparently in 1895, which is, interesting because you think about like population boom and what was happening around that time, the Earth was going to change very, very much. They bring the avatar, or they sort of, they find a body, or I don't know, if in Meher Baba's cosmology, time is not a linear thing. It works in different ways. So, but there is an avatar, a suitable candidate, I guess, in terms of a physical body that this, consciousness can exist in. And if you look at the way that, it really is like, if you look at all of and it's all hagiography, but it's, pretty good in terms of biographies and, historical accuracy, having like several different accounts that are being cross-referenced to see what happened. It seems like Meher Baba's like its personality. Not his personality, but it does almost seem like there was, this moment and this break, after the kiss that he had from Hazrat Babajan, and then he went to the Upsani Maharaj, and he threw this rock at Meher Baba's head that hit him in the same place where the kiss was, and he knocked him unconscious, and then he like started coming out of his fugue state. There's, all of this stuff that it seems to me, and I don't know, this is my weird sort of like thought that I've thought many times, is that, it seems like that at that time, the late 1800s, there were a lot of people who were getting kind of the same info or having similar experiences to what Meher Baba went through. And, maybe, I'm trying to think of, reasons or sort of logical reasons for, how he ended up being the way he was, is that, maybe he did have like a really suitable body or psyche for cosmic consciousness to sort of, gel with. And that we also got these other people like Jane Roberts or Edgar Casey, or Gurdjieff, that were also getting it, but maybe like the reception was a little fuzzier, or it just was in a different frequency or something like that,
Yeah.
And so there are these things like it's, maybe there is, a cosmic consciousness that is trying to incarnate or, tell us something. I don't know.
Well, and then like the fugue state from the kiss and then the rock hitting the same place almost sounds like, preparation and conspiring.
Yeah.
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 So, to add to that platform to carry the letters through,
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm kind of fascinated by that.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by a lot of it. It's, I find it, and the other thing that I think is important to talk about too is there's even like one academic paper written about it that exists out there, very few. But a lot of another important way I think to sort of interpret the way that Meher Baba worked, if you read the material, is to look at his life as symbolic. So I think that a lot of the things that he said and the gestures that he made, they are almost like you can think of them as like sigils, like hyper sigils. Like they were things that had to do with larger sort of like, and again, you have to believe that there's some veracity to the sort of perfect master avatar narrative that, he would make a gesture like, something like the letterboard that he used to communicate, and how that, there are several people within the Meher Baba community that, are thinking about things in a more intellectual way that have talked about it, even though I don't agree with most of the stuff that they do in terms of how they interpret stuff. They were, talking about the alphabet board that he used and the prevalence of texting and how it's become something that is, because he was essentially texting is what he was doing without a screen. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot. He had this whole period in the 60s after meeting with Ram Dass and some of the other guys that were part of Timothy Leary's Harvard psychedelic crew, where he came out and made a statement about how, people who were trying to use LSD as a shortcut to spirituality weren't going to find, you can't just take a pill and all of a sudden know God. That, he said to Ram Dass, he's like, it can be a method of, getting to a place where you're going to the spiritual path, but putting all, saying that you can find, take a pill or, take a tab and all of a sudden you have God consciousness is, a little bit is naive. Right. And so, people like Ram Dass or other folks that would come through, he would say, I would recommend, if you need to, if you need to take the drug some more, fine. But, that's like, it's best if you use it as a tool or, go out in a field and, read a book on spirituality or something like that. And it's similar to kind of what Ram Dass had an experience when he met his guru, who is this other Baba in India named Neem Karoli Baba, who, when Ram Dass went there to visit him in India, he gave him a bunch of LSD, and, Neem Karoli Baba took it like enough to like kill a person or something. And he just popped it all in his mouth. And a couple hours later, he was fine. And he said, "Oh, I know what this is. This is yogi medicine, but people don't know how to take it correctly anymore." But I think that when Meher Baba did that, there was actually, the way that I would see it is that in the 60s, he was putting out this no drugs sort of statement. And usually what's been sort of drawn from that is the phrase no drugs, which is interesting because I think this came right at the same time that Nixon started his war on drugs, which became this huge global influence and force. It's also prior to the pharmaceutical company sort of takeover of our medical establishment. We're very much a drug culture at this point now. And I think there's an interesting sort of symbolic correlation between those two. But again, when you're talking about symbolic or synchronistic stuff like this, it's all going to be very sort of unscientific, unacademic, proof or claims. But for me, there's a resonance there, and that kind of keeps me going in terms of my interest.
Yeah.
How many people do you think still follow him today?
So there are several centers around, that are kind of centers for Meher Baba. The big one is in India, and there are a lot of Meher Baba, followers in India, but, there are a lot of guru followers in India. It's just part of the culture. So it kind of gets subsumed by that. I don't know how many. I mean, definitely thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe more. I don't know. In the U.S., you're going to find the other sort of like groups in the U.S. and in Australia and in England to some degree. There's a place in Australia that's called Avatar's Abode, which is like an ashram. It's the place where Meher Baba visited when he went to Australia. You can go there, and I don't know, maybe a few thousand people or parts of the communities around Australia. Same in the US, maybe a little bit more. There's an ashram that's in South Carolina in Myrtle Beach. It's this, sort of pristine acres of woodland forest right nestled amongst the beaches and, craziness of Myrtle Beach right there on the beach. And it's this ashram. And then there's another one, like a small, there's some small ones. Well, there's one near, I think, Mariposa, and there's one in like near LA, I think near like Ojai or something like that. But, these are small centers, and they're groups and maybe like few of the major cities around, but I don't know. There could be a lot of secret folks, but it seems to me like the older generation is, getting older. A lot of the boomers that were part of it, and I have not found, there are certainly a lot of kids like me who are now grown up that are like Gen X, maybe some millennials that had parents that were these, American Baba lovers, quote unquote. And there was a whole bunch of these kids. Like there was a camp for Meher Baba kids that my parents used to send me to when I was like a kid. That was in at that place I talked about in Myrtle Beach, and it was basically like a summer camp. It was like probably a lot like Bible camp, honestly. You're talking and reading about Meher Baba and cooking and singing songs and stuff like that. It was basically a boring camp, in that sense. But I don't know what those kids are now. I'm not in contact with any of them. There are no groups. If you look on like Facebook or any of the social media. I say Facebook because it's where the boomers are, they're still around, but there are not a lot of younger people. I mean, I met some folks when I was in India the last time, which was when I was in my early 20s, but, there was just, most of them were still like the old guard. So I don't know how many folks there are. I certainly don't have anybody to talk to this about. My brother's the only person, he's 5 years younger than me, but he's the only person I know that I can talk to this stuff about that has like, the same frame of reference and experience. I'm sure there are others out there, but I don't know what they're doing.
Well, so what did he say about UFOs?
All right. So he said he talked about UFOs only twice, which I think is really, really weird, seeing as how intrinsically connected they were with occult and esoteric, stuff going on from like 47 after that. So I find it very surprising. There are only 2 recorded instances in books of him talking about it. I have heard that other people would ask him about it and that he would usually kind of get supposedly he would get a little annoyed and say, I shouldn't talk about that, which I find very strange. The 2 times that it is recorded, on these books of these people wrote of their time with him, these 2 women asked him at 2 separate times, and this was probably in the 50s, and they referred to them as flying saucers both the times. So I don't know if, the parsing out the word UFO versus flying saucer has any significance, but both times he was asked about flying saucers, he said, I usually don't talk to people. He said something to this effect. I can't remember without having the book in front of me.
Sure.
I don't usually respond to people about this because I don't think that it's the right time to give out that information. But since people have been recently talking about UFOs coming from other planets in the solar system, I will say this: flying saucers, particularly. Flying saucers do not come from other planets. That was his one statement.
It was interesting.
And he said it twice.
Seth doesn't.
It's interesting, yeah. He did talk a lot about other worlds, though. And he said there very specifically, there were other worlds, many other worlds like our Earth that had creatures like us. How you want to, parse that out, you can. And that on some worlds, their intellects are so advanced that they're able to talk to each other through telepathy or, without speaking.
Right.
And that, but that on those worlds, there's very little emotion or love. And that the reason why the Earth is special right now at this particular time in the universe is that it has a balance of intellect and love, and that you'll find a lot of other worlds that don't have that balance. And so that's why we're sort of like this special world where the perfect masters are. And that it's not always this Earth. It's just, I got no idea. Apparently we are connected to 2 other worlds that are, I don't know if he's talking about dimensions or other physical worlds around on, different frequencies, but apparently Earth is part of a triumvirate of 3 worlds that are so interconnected that they are known as the first world, and that there are these 2 other worlds. There's world A, B, and C. And if we're world A, then world B has like 75%, like the intellectual capacity of those that are in world B is like, if we're at 50%, they're at 75% intellect, 25% emotion, and that the world C is like 100% emotion, and they're very advanced.
Interesting. Emotion or intellect?
Well, intellect. I'm sorry, intellect. Okay. Yeah, intellect.
I always found it interesting that one of the few comments Seth makes about like flying saucers in probably the very early 70s, he said something like, "Those are other consciousnesses from other realities." And I'm kind of surprised you can see them.
Yeah, right?
So, but he talked about that's how things travel between different realities is, just pure consciousness.
Yeah. No, that absolutely gels with, that's the primary thing, one of the primary ways of looking at the Meher Baba cosmology is it's consciousness first, and that all of creation is an engine to help consciousness realize itself.
So go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry. Okay. No. You talked earlier about we're kind of meat sacks to generate consciousness.
Yeah.
Is it like kind of two-sided because you're talking about the droplets that kind of had the shells harden around them and things like that? I don't even quite understand my question now that I'm starting to ask it, but
well. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about it is that, like, it's a cosmology that's it's kind of hard. Not that it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but there's like these contradictions to it that I think are like supposed to be embedded in it.
Right.
And the best way to look at it, and I do think that it's worth if you believe Evans Wentz too, it's worth reading the one book that Meher Baba wrote, which is this book, and it's cheekily called God Speaks, which is very funny. I think it's trolling. I mean, honestly, especially if you know how, much humor and being a mischievous trickster was part of Meher Baba's like modus operandi. Calling your book in the 60s, God Speaks, being a completely speechless, mystic. And he dedicated the book to the universe. I think it's being cheeky. Anyway, it's a very eloquent and philosophical, and this is kind of what Evans Wentz said, cosmology or explanation of the cosmology that I'm talking about in a way that, I don't think it involves too many contradictions, and it's, it can be kind of hard to wrap your head around, but it's pretty, I think it's pretty interesting.
How much of the way you view things do you think was influenced by this still?
I mean, I'm going to be honest. I think 100% of what I, look at, is influenced by this. If you, in the same way that if you were raised as a fundamentalist Christian or Muslim, or in any religious household where you had, your parents telling you that this was the spiritual truth, this is the way, this, we figured it out, this is how things are, which is how they presented things to me. And, most people that grow up in religious households have that experience. So I think that the way that I look at the world is defined either by, this intrinsic stuff that's part of me, or me trying to separate myself or divorce myself or like purge myself from, what I was taught as a kid. Because I don't like the idea of having, my spirituality or my, philosophical outlook on, existence being something that is based upon a truth that other people told me. I have to figure it out for myself. But the unfortunate thing for me is that the further I go into exploring it, the more it goes back to me thinking like there is some truth to this, or at least this is the thing that resonates the most with me. So this is, a path that fulfills me, is looking into and following, trying to follow this trail of the stuff that Meher Baba has put out. But, a lot of the stuff, I would say that most of the stuff that I adhere to or like agree with out of material that he put out is bolstered by material other people have put out. And maybe you don't, and I don't think you necessarily need that. Like, I think if somebody wants to have faith in a particular, teacher or guru or philosophy, have at it. As long as you leave yourself the option to not be locked into that if your feelings should change. But yeah, I think that even if I'm reacting against it and I'm trying to purge myself of embedded notions that were, sort of entrained into me by my upbringing, it's still a huge part of what, how I look at things now. And I think that a huge part of that too is the fact that it intersects with a lot of really, I think, powerful ideas that come out of the best parts of Vedanta and Sufism and Zoroastrianism and mystical Christianity. So if I were to meet up with somebody that was, a mystical Christian and they were a mystical Catholic and they were wanted to talk about it, I am 100%, I'll talk to you about Jesus all day. I love that. I think we're talking about, I feel like we're talking about the same thing. I know that might make some people who have particular Christian views uncomfortable, but I do think that, and I say the same thing to somebody if they were Hindu or Zoroastrian or Sufi or, really into Seth,
It sounds like you just described chaos mysticism.
That's a good way to talk. I mean, hey, when I got drawn to magic, with a big M, it was to chaos magic because of that. Yeah.
I kind of have that same thought, and I feel silly saying this, but when I had my second Jack Kirby experience with the ketamine infusions, he was like, hey, if you want to relate to, all of this way, meaning like kind of the way he viewed things, you can. But it wasn't like, this is how it is. It was just if you want to.
Right.
And I kind of got the message from that too of, it's just whatever you pick that works for you. That helps you relate to everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also, maybe it's just because it agrees with me, but, Meher Baba a lot of times said, and he was very clear about, in terms of like general spiritual, like the best way to live your life, he, talked a lot about how it's, oftentimes better to be a secular person who lives their life in a selfless way that, tries to be, in the world, but not of it. And, to not be overly, greedy or materialist and, just in the way that we would think of like being a decent, really, a good, normal person, that's going to be more beneficial for you spiritually than being, a person who goes to church every Sunday and does your, all of your prayers when you're supposed to, but, doesn't really feel that emotion of compassion and love.
Right. Yeah. We're out of time, but thank you, Chris, for elucidating this a bit.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to anybody if I was overly confusing or, using terms that don't make a lot of sense. As I was telling Saxon, off air, it's hard because I have, all of this in my head in voluminous notes, but a lot of it is, this very insular speak that and using phrases that people wouldn't know. So, if it was confusing, I'm sorry. I hope it was interesting to some degree for some folks.
Did you say you were eventually working on a sort of documentary about him?
Yeah, I am. I have a lot of material, and one thing that I might be able to do is I have some recorded presentations that I have done that, I could give to Soraya to put up on Patreon that go into some detail on this part of my prep and extends from the Strange Realities stuff that I did live. So I'll see if I can wrangle those together and get them, if people are interested in more on this. It'd have some pictures, and I have a script that I'm reading from that is a practice for, documentary work.
Nice. All right. And people can find you where, Chris?
You can go to brightrectangle.com.
And Saxon?
You can find me here, and, I hang out on Blue Sky and Instagram under Super Informant.
And happy 173rd birthday.
Yes,
absolutely.
I'm aging rapidly as we speak.
To another century.
But you still look fine.
Thank you.
You look like a perfectly healthy, 20-year-old.
It's the sunscreen.
That makes sense.
Good.
Anyway, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my patrons, because without you, this show would not exist. I want to give a special shout out to those patrons pledging $10 or more: Greg Ross, Cherry Trapezoid, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Mark Smith, Marty Garza, Matt in Delaware, Tactical Therapist, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Tyler Glimstead, Christine, Abby Allen, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Bluminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, Jay, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Janet's Planet, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Jonathan Frost, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Shrek, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Liam Huddock, Linda from Michigan, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Shoemaker, Mark Brady, Mothman Bren, Automation, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Seed Person, Stacy Sherwood, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic podcast, Taylor Bell, The Ghost Story Guys, Thunderboy, Varoche K, Victoria, Vincent Trewell, Will Cherry, Will Powell, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Colin Karras, Craig Sagastumi, and Matthew Brown. Thank you all so very, very much for making this show possible. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. There is a Patreon as well, which Chris and I actually did before this show. So it's just Chris and I because Saxon was tied up because it was his birthday. And apparently he wanted to be tied up. So there you go. That'll be out soon for patrons. And you can become a patron by going to wheredidtheroadgo.com and clicking on the big Patreon link. I want to welcome a few new patrons. Ilka Newton, Matt Sheehy, maybe it's Sheehy, and Ellie Nelson. I hope I pronounced everyone's names right. If I didn't, feel free to let me know. And thank you for joining up, and I hope you like the extra content, because there's a lot of it. See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.